Our next respondent is Professor right here in UBC. Please join his bio is on your program. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Mathias.
I'm going to be brief. I want to hear from you, and much of what I've said has been most eloquently brought forth by Thomas and by Will. I'm not a PhD. I'm sort of I could never manage to write more than 3 words at a time, so I'm an ND. And not only can I write short things, you can't read them. But I'm going to raise a couple of issues. First of all, I teach a course in critical thinking. And a course in critical thinking basically puts our paradigm of science against the paradigm of beliefs. And if there's one thing that the course in critical thinking should teach us, it's that when the evidence changes, we must change. And if we don't do that, then we're working on a different paradigm. And I hate to say it, but you've seen lots of evidence here today that the politicians are working on a different paradigm. It's not evidence, it is belief. Why did we get here? Well, it's very interesting. The first study that I know of was in 1898. It was probably the best study ever done on cannabis, on marijuana. It was done in India. And it said that people who use marijuana are just as productive as people who don't, and that there were no health effects. And that was in 1898. And we've done numbers of studies here in Canada ever since. The evidence is consistent, but the reactions are very different. We have, in the 1920s, we had people talking about we have to stop opium use among our Chinese population because, well, they might seduce our white girls. Such a racist policy, which is continuing to this day. We have people in Alberta talking about reefer madness. Reefer madness doesn't exist. So we have a policy which is based on a moral grounding, and the 1961 UN Declaration, the Single Convention, says that addictions are evil. Drugs aren't evil. Drugs are neutral. But addictions are evil. And evil is a moral decision to be made. And we are still working with this view that many people see not only drugs as evil, but as people who use them as evil. And evil people have no human rights. Good example is the International Narcotics Control Board that Thomas referred to. He said, we have to stop the indigenous people of the Andes from using coca leaves and making their tea. This million people who've been doing this for 1,000 years or more, we have to stop it. Why do we have to stop it? There's no harms attached to it. Because my regulations say this is evil. You can't do it. Why do we fight against using crack mouthpieces to prevent the transmission of hepatitis C? Our users in this country have a right. They have a right to health. We have a charter of human rights. How can this person, how can that person, how can Clement say, but if you use drugs, you have no rights. If you use drugs, it's okay if you die. It's okay if you get HIV and hepatitis C. Well, I can't really answer that for you because I'm a member of the Health Officers Council of British Columbia. And we have produced a paper. We have to have something to try to replace what is there. And we produced a paper called the Public Health Framework for Psychoactive Drugs, which includes all the psychoactive drugs. It's as best as we can do it evidence-based. It's different for every drug because every drug has a different ratio of benefits and risks. And if you want to take this further, I would suggest that it's a paper that may be worth your attention in reading. I expect you to read that paper and to march on Ottawa. I grew up in the 60s when the Vietnam War was on. And we marched. And we protested. And if we don't march and we protest, we will never be able to help our brothers and sisters who are drug users and that much smaller group of drug users who are addicted and dependent. Who's going to fight us? Well, there are people who will fight us on moral grounds, and that's perfectly acceptable. There will be people who fight us because they think their jobs are at risk. And that's the RCMP and prison guards and a large number of other people. But the tough one is people who are making a profit on the drug trade do not want it to change. They are people who are fine, upstanding citizens with a lot of money in their pockets. And they're going to go to Tony Kwan. And they're going to say, Tony, how much money do you need for your next campaign? What can we do to help you out? And until we look at this like we had to look at the tobacco companies back in the 70s and 80s, and we finally had to say, you can't do this anymore. This is going to be your fight. This is going to be a tough fight, but we cannot lose. On to Ottawa.
Well, thanks very much, Julian. I'm delighted to be here. And let me just say, I'm not a PhD, I'm not an MD, I'm just a politician. And I want to say, I don't want all of you to go away thinking that we're all just like Stephen Harper and Tony Kwan. And before we wrap this session, I do want to just take a moment to go back and visit really how did Insite of the fight for harm reduction come about. And in that process, what did it take? And now where are we, as Thomas, I think, so eloquently put, how the situation has really turned us back on so many fronts. The question really, in my mind, is this, is quite fundamental. And that is the preservation of human life more important than partisan politics, political polls, and election cycles? Speed doctors in every political party, not spin doctors, I gotta tell you, and to be throwing political caution to the winds to say, addressing long-range solutions to serious health problems for marginalized people who don't vote is political suicide. And sometimes, we as politicians have a choice to make. We need to either move beyond conventional and convenient political thought to embrace new ideas, take a risk what you believe is the right thing to do, and to challenge the cultural perspective on what people believe is and what policy should be. And I have to say, I represent Vancouver Mount Pleasant, the poorest neighborhood in all of Canada. And quite frankly, there are many people in my neighborhood that not very many people care about. They couldn't give a shit, and pardon my French, about a lot of people in that community. And that goes with politicians as well. And it wasn't until the medical professionals, the coroner's office, the health authorities, and advocates from all fronts, not just addicts and people who are fighting the addiction, but other people as well. Families, individuals who have children, who are doctors, lawyers, prosecutors, they came forward and said, just a minute. Overdose and the spread of HIV and AIDS through needles and needle exchange programs need to be put in place. Why? Because it saves lives.